Hey again, everyone. All right, so we're finally to this final topic for our first chapter, right? When we're just trying to get a good foundational understanding of what strategy is really all about, its difference from some key other elements that we talk about in business, what types of things it focuses on, just to give us kind of a good, 1,000-foot view of what we're talking about. So the last thing that we really want to talk about, as we've really stressed this idea of value, creating value and providing it for people, which is really the aim of our business in general. One of the things that I know that can be confusing sometimes is conflating this idea of a firm's strategy with a firm's business model. And so what we're going to do is talk through just for a few here about the differences between them and really understanding, how they need to align, but they are not the same thing, right? So quickly and easily, right? A firm's business model is really, it's this idea that the firm's business model sets forth how our strategy and our operating approaches are going to create value, right? Our firm's strategy, as we've talked about up until this point, is how are we going to set forth our competitive initiatives, choose what those are, and try to, use those to create some sort of business approach. But our firm's business model is basically the details and the test of that strategy to see whether or not, if we follow that strategy, like this model that we're going to use, how does it create value for customers? How's it going to generate, good enough revenues to cover the costs and hopefully realize a profit, which is what we're going for at the end, right? So we have our strategy, our high level idea about what we're going for and the approach. And then that business model is really the details. It's really, since a strategy informs our business model, right? Our business model has to work within the constraints of our chosen strategy. When a strategy isn't working, the model's not viable. So it's going to be very rare that we could have one of these working without the other. Its ability to survive as a firm is really in jeopardy once a business has misaligned strategy and business models, right? So if our strategy doesn't establish a really good way to earn profits, it's going to be flawed, and the business models that we try to enact are likely not going to accomplish those things we're trying to do. So essentially, if we want to think about it from a hierarchical standpoint, our business strategy really sets the tone, it sets the parameters and says, here are going to be the competitive initiatives, the business approaches we're going to take, and then within this box, we need to fit our model to basically tailor a business model that is going to allow us to generate revenues, get enough cash flowing, cover our expenses, and basically earn a profit. So from a customer perspective, basically the greater the value that we deliver, and basically at the lower price, the more attractive that our value proposition is going to be to our customers, right? We see here that we define this idea of the customer value proposition is, as a business, how are we going to satisfy the needs that our customers have at a price that they think they're getting a good value out of, which the difficult thing is that differs from person to person, right? I might look at something, I'm like, yo, that's a great value, what that does for that price. And somebody else might be like, you gotta be nuts to be paying that for it or to buy it at all, right? Consumer taste, if you took a lot of stuff in marketing, consumer behavior and tastes, they vary wildly. We know that. So this is kind of the difficult thing about the customer value proposition. But what we're really hoping for is for a general mass of people, our specific target market, are we going to basically provide them the value they're looking for at a price they're willing to pay? Nothing more difficult than that. So from a firm's perspective, basically, the greater the value that we deliver people for the higher, and the higher the price that we can offer it to them at, the better, right? Because then we have a larger margin as a business, right? If we can get people to pay more and more for it for that same value, then awesome. We see a bigger margin. We likely are going to have more money left over after we pay our costs. And that's better. But as we said, from a customer's perspective, they want the greatest value at the lowest price. and we as a business would like offer the greatest value to them at the highest price possible, we see that there's a disparity and difference between these ideas. This is something we have to constantly deal with as a business. Excuse me. So this brings us to this idea of our profit proposition as we talk about that, right? Our profit proposition is basically reflecting how are we going to generate enough revenue to cover those costs, but still deliver on that value proposition for our people, because we want to offer it at the highest price. They want it offered to them at the lowest price, right? How are we going to control the costs of the value that we deliver, right? One way of controlling the cost is basically sell it for a higher price to be able to cover those costs, but people aren't necessarily going to be unaffected by the fact that we're offering it at a higher price. People are price sensitive. It's a difficult dance that we play back and forth with people. So we have to keep in mind these questions. How are we going to control those costs so we can offer that value to people at a price that they think is fair and they're willing to pay for? How is the proposition going to yield attractive profits for our shareholders? And basically keeping in mind all the time, the lower that our firm's costs are relative to our revenues, the greater amount of potential profit we're going to see, and the more attractive that profit proposition is for us as a business. So, we always want to know like a good way how we test our profit proposition. Like, is this really going to cover what I need? Are people still going to buy it? Are we going to make enough money to cover our costs and show a profit? Because that's really what we're aiming for here, right? So we have some questions, that we want to consider, right? Can we create and deliver the intended level of value at a cost-efficient manner? That's going to be our aim all the time. On top of this, can a profitable price be charged for the value that we provide our buyers, right? So these are simple questions. They don't have simple answers. They're often kind of difficult to find this delicate intersection between these two things from an economic standpoint, right? So we just want to remember this classic financial equation: R equals PQ, right? Revenues that we generate are a function of the volume of the customers that we attract, that Q, at the price being charged, P, right? So the cost of our firm's business model approach basically depends on the resources we have access to, the business processes that we utilize, how good we are at them, how efficient they are, how effective they are, the cost efficiency of those operating systems. Basically, lower costs with relation to the revenues, to revenues increasing, like this will basically increase our profit potential, right? Lowering costs and increasing revenues. So the more we can do both of these things, basically, the more attractive our profit proposition is going to be for the people involved. So making reasonable profits isn't ever going to be possible for us without a proven approach with our business model. And this is why we stress so much in entrepreneurship and business startups that we have to have a proven approach with our business model of how we're going to make money and how we're going to make enough money to cover those costs that are a reality of doing business. So how do we know if we've got a winner? Good question. Well, testing the merits of basically one strategic approach we might choose versus another. As we said, there are a lot of avenues towards where we're trying to get to, but testing the merits of one of those against another in order to distinguish, a winning strategy from a flawed strategy or a weak strategy really requires us to ask a few key questions. So this goodness of fit test, right? Is the strategy that we've chosen well matched with our internal and our external situations? We will talk more about how to determine these things. We have the competitive advantage of test, right? Is the strategy helping our company achieve some sort of sustainable competitive advantage? Because like we said, that's the name of the game. And the performance test, the simple one, is the strategy producing good enough performance for our company? Well, to qualify as a winning strategy, company's strategy must be well suited to the company's external, internal situation, help build a sustainable competitive advantage, and improve firm performance. If we're going to qualify the strategy we choose as a winning one, we got to pass all three of these tests. Now, the way we do that, we'll talk more about as we continue forward.